So Brian, I want to turn to you for a minute. So builders and planners are always going to have tensions that nobody moves fast enough. But from your perspective, from both a rental and a purchase side of commercial properties here on Long Island, are you seeing that the zoning regs don't support the businesses that want to locate and grow here? Are you seeing that as a major impediment? What are you seeing, and what do you think would be good changes on that end?
Well, from the office sector, there's been, I think, a 6% increase in the supply of office space in Long Island since 1991. So from the office perspective, there's not a lot of office development. When large companies move out, that becomes the supply of space. For example, since 2000, JP Morgan Chase has given up 1.5 million square feet of space, so that space took 5-7 years to absorb. In the industrial is where we're really lacking in space. The vacancy rate, my partner Jack O'Connor out there could tell you, we're probably at 2 to 3% vacancy rate in industrial. There is no space out there, and that has been a benefit. We've created jobs on Long Island is from the migration of companies coming from Queens and Brooklyn and Long Island City, because the price of their real estate went up so much, and with the rezoning of Long Island City, as you've seen, in Williamsburg, these companies have sold their properties and come out to Long Island. And the industrial market now, you can buy, it's more expensive to buy a vacant industrial building than it is to buy a vacant office building, because the demand is so high. So we really need to find more places to build industrial. And they also need to change the zoning as we get back to it. With, most of the buildings in Long Island, the stock of industrial properties are 14, 16, 18 foot clear. The new modern warehouse is 36 foot clear. So you need to be able to change the height restrictions in zoning to be able to build up and create more industrial space that way, as well as to find land that you can build new industrial, because that's where the real demand is from the commercial sector.
That's great. So Kelly, let's talk a little bit about that, because that's the mission, right,
Sure.
of the IDA. And talk a little bit about, for those who don't know exactly how the IDA would work, for somebody who wanted to benefit from those offerings that you have, but also how you guys are sort of helping educate folks like the RPA and other planners out there to get this industrial space freed up so these guys can rent it.
Right. Well, and we could take that back to the Hauppauge Industrial Park, and you talked earlier about the overlay zone in that park. And as mentioned, at a 2 or 3% vacancy rate, we now have the ability in the Hauppauge Industrial Park to go up to heights of 60 feet on Motor Parkway, and I think it's 42 and 51 in other places, along with allowing different uses. And the town has worked very closely, finally, with the Hauppauge Industrial Association. But there again, we run into problems with permitting and construction costs, and how do we encourage developers to raise the heights of the ceilings and make that attainable. And we are finally starting to see some of that occur in that area, and I think it's really encouraging. And I think a lot of that goes to planning. And planning is something that the Suffolk IDA has started to, we have an open services agreement with the Regional Plan Association, RPA. And RPA is providing services to municipalities that do not have planning services, so that the towns that are willing and are interested in multi-use and multifamily and growing their communities and getting ready for East Side Access, which we know will be a huge game changer for many of these towns on that line. We see all of that as an important activity for us as economic developers to do. So we've worked we actually did a very small visioning and planning with Terry, and we hope to further that. And as a result of that, some of the changes were made to the zoning there. We worked in Amityville, Lindenhurst, West Babylon, Kings Park, and Smithtown. And we're currently working in East Patchogue because everybody wants to be like Patchogue, including East Patchogue, which is kind of funny. But and as a result of these planning efforts, we're seeing increases in zoning. We're seeing increases in infrastructure dollars being committed to that community. Example being Kings Park, Smithtown, $200 million worth of sewers are proposed for that area. So we think that planning is really critical, and we as an agency want to participate with local government and private developers, realtors in that effort for the greater good of the economy on Long Island.
Yeah. And you guys do a great job. Brian, you have one more point?
Yeah, when you talk about infrastructure and you talk about development of industrial properties, development of anything, sewers are the critical component. You have a density on a site of maximum of 30%, 33% with no sewers. So, because you need the land for the septic systems. So they'll only let you build so much. Without infrastructure and improvements in sewers, roads, access, and utilities, you can't get the buildings that you want, so you're required to have much more land, which doesn't exist on Long Island. So infrastructure is the key. Two other quick points. I want to add one more word to Mitch's change of zoning, and that's taxes. The taxes in Long Island are so high. When you think about it, in Nassau County, 1/3 of your rental income in commercial properties, and it could even be higher, go to taxes. And so when you look at what it costs to re-tenant the building and do improvements, with the tax burden is so high, you can't afford to really do it. So I think those are some of the issues.
Yep, and that's a perfect segue to Kurt, because I wanted to ask you, maybe you can talk about from a real estate development perspective. So you're listening to all these challenges, right? And you have a hungry, well-funded, developer that comes to you and says, I'd like to do these projects. What are the tax consequences now? And talk about some of the incentives and consequences to real estate development. And then shift into what's being proposed in Congress today and how might that change. So give us a sort of a thorough overview of that if you can.
Sure, absolutely. And, in discussing the current landscape, we haven't had any significant changes in tax policy other than the Obamacare net investment income tax recently, I would say at least in the last 10 years. Bonus depreciation has been something that's been in existence and renewed annually for the last 10 years, so that's been a big advantage. But I think most real estate professionals at this point have a pretty good handle on the tax code and structures that help them save the most and maximize and benefit from the 20% capital gains rate, the real estate professional election, which allows them to offset losses against some of their income. So it's been pretty static for us for the last 10 years. And the new legislation really kind of crumples all of that up in a ball and throws it away. It changes day to day, week to week, as the bills make their way through the House and the Senate and the finance committees. Ultimately, the Senate will be passing the bill soon, hopefully, and then it has to be reconciled between the two houses of Congress. So that's when we're really going to get some solidification of what's being proposed. There are a few things you can probably bank on, assuming the bill gets passed in the first place. The 20% corporate rate seems to be the biggest change that we're going to have, and that's really going to throw a wrench in what we're used to in the real estate fund structure and investment, even for owner operator local developers, because we're all used to partnerships and having those losses flow through, having those capital gain treatments flow through. And using the partnership form, which allows a lot of flexibility legally in how the partners interact with each other, how they get their cash distributions, how they're allocated their taxable income. So with this new 20% corporate rate coming into play, I think we're going to see a lot more corporations being used to house real estate deals. It's going to prevent income from flowing through until distributions are made. And when you look at the 20% rate with a 15% dividend rate at the individual level, all of a sudden that tax hit from having that second layer of taxation is a lot more bearable. I think it's also going to help with investment from foreigners and from tax-exempt entities. Those are two investors that currently use corporations for other purposes now that have just kind of decided to live with the fact that they've got this 35% burden that they've got to bear. So all of a sudden, their IRR, their return on investment goes up because of this lower rate. So it's going to be interesting to see how much of this gets passed and what it looks like in its final form and what the timing is. The House says 2018 for this lower rate. The Senate says 2019 because they don't want to pay for it. One of the other proposals is 100% bonus depreciation for 1 year, phasing down to 80% and 60% and ultimately expiring. That may spur a lot of development going on. They've been very generous lately in the depreciation and write-offs that are available to real estate professionals. 2 years ago, they changed the tangible property regulations, which allowed basically all minor tenant improvements to be written off as development was occurring within buildings. So I think, I've seen my clients take advantage of that, and it's definitely been a great current deduction for them. And, Joe, if you don't mind, I'll just do 2 minutes on what it means to Long Islanders personally. So, everybody sitting in this room is going to be impacted by the possible new legislation, and it's going to really hit New York and Long Island particularly hard. We're one of the highest tax states in the country, and they're talking about removing the deductions for both the state income tax and the real property taxes, as well as limiting your mortgage interest deductions. So, if you're under 100,000, you're probably going to do better. If you're under 100,000 and don't have a home, you're definitely going to do better. But unfortunately, on Long Island, 100,000 is not wealthy. That's middle class around here. So if you're over 100,000 a year, you're going to feel it. They are eliminating the AMT, so that's great. But the AMT is at a 28% rate. What they're doing now with these brackets, the 35% bracket may hit at a lot sooner than it used to. So you may be at 35% with no deduction for your state income tax and no deduction for your real estate taxes or mortgage interest. So that could significantly raise our tax bill in the middle to upper middle class section of Long Island.
Well, that's good news, right? Let's turn to a more cheery subject, Mitch. Traffic. I mean, I love traffic as much as I love taxes, so let's do them back to back. I mean, anybody on Long Island, it's infuriating, right? It's the same commute I've been doing for many, many years, and every year 5 minutes gets added onto it simply because of traffic. And once again, private industry, I think, is going to be a solution to this in terms of Uber, in terms of Lyft. So one of the things that I'm involved in is the Energia program here on Long Island. We had our transportation module. Kelly was not there. You were absent, and Corte wasn't there either. He was absent. But what we had were folks from Uber come in and talk about how they are partnering with railroads and mass transit, so that places like Long Island, the congestion can be chopped down a bit in terms of, and folks can save expenses because they only need one car, not a station car anymore to go to the train station. Right. But I look at it and I say, I would love it if we had some sort of overlay mass transportation. I think we would also free up a lot of parking space at the train stations, and people may use the train stations and the train more because they don't have to fight with parking every morning. But what do you see in terms of transportation, Mitch?
Well, obviously, Long Island is not going to build itself out of its transportation problem. The likelihood of building any more roads of any significance on Long Island, that era has come and gone. We do get,
great point. That's a great point.
We do get sometimes expansions for those of us who have the benefit of most days driving on 347. We are very grateful for the third lane in each direction, but the ability to do that in other places is very, very limited. And so, we're not building ourselves out of that context. So and the other problem that we have, especially in Suffolk County, is because of the lack of density in many places, a vibrant county bus system is very difficult and very expensive, because you don't have 20 people who live in the same place going to the same place, which is what a bus does. You have 10 people in 10 different places going to 10 different places, and therefore it makes the bus system very, very difficult to operate, very difficult to get the numbers that are necessary. And you know, as we know, unfortunately, in Suffolk County, the only people who take the bus are the people who have to take the bus, not want to take the bus, which is a different context in that regard. So the railroad obviously is located where it is. The likelihood that we're going to build new rail lines anywhere is not happening. So therefore, what we try to do is increase the ability to serve our communities on the lines we have, which is one of the purposes of second track and third track. When second track and third track are done, service from Ronkonkoma will expand by 40%. We will be able to run 40% more trains in both directions, which is something, as you know, you cannot go eastbound in the morning from 6:30 until 9:30 because all the trains are going westbound, and the same thing happens in the evening commute, which is why we get complaints from the Ranger fans who have to take the 440 out of Ronkonkoma because there is no 540. The reason there is no 540 is because you'd hit the trains coming in the other direction. But the ability to use Uber, Lyft, and other options like that, the difficult part on Long Island for many people is they want to take the train. How do they get the last mile from the train station to their house if they don't live by the train station? One of the benefits, obviously, of people who live by the train station is they don't need that car to go to the train station. They are already there. I mean, one of my members, built the 2 communities in Farmingdale, and he tells me all the time, the people who live there wait in their apartment for the train to come. Because when they hear the train, they walk out of their apartment, down the steps, up the steps, and they're there, which is a fantastic opportunity because Farmingdale has not had to expand their parking or use other means to do that. The hope is, when Ronkonkoma is done, that'll be 1,250 residential units within walking distance of the train station for people to be able to use the train station without having to drive to the train station, because we're not building any more parking at Ronkonkoma other than what's going to be done as part of the development itself. So that last mile is a difficult thing. Many communities have tried to use the smaller buses to do that. It's very difficult to do that. It's very difficult from a cost standpoint, and it's very difficult from a getting enough people to do it standpoint. So the solution to Long Island's transportation problems is for people to live where they work on Long Island. And that not just means in other communities, it means in Melville being able to put residential in the office complexes, okay, which is a perfect opportunity so people who live there can work there, so they don't need the car or don't need the other means of access. That's why we have to change the paradigm of the segregation of uses and combine them. That will help Long Island's transportation problem.